In this video, we'll focus in AddonSoftware's distribution module. In particular, we're going to focus in on inventory control and see how AddonSoftware helps you stay on top of your inventory, track your inventory throughout the purchasing and sale processes. I'm going to begin by jumping right into a couple of our inventory reports. You can see there are quite a few reports to help you manage inventory. I want to take a look initially at a few of the most popular reports that you can run on a daily basis, periodic basis, to really help you manage what you have in inventory. This first report we want to look at is the Inventory Stock Status Report. I'm going to double click here. We see that we could filter this report in several ways for a particular warehouse, for a particular category of product. I'm going to filter it just for our specific demonstration item. We'll take a look in more detail at this item in a bit, but let's first run the report. Now, I double clicked here, which is a handy tool that you've probably already seen within the application that lets you very quickly return to the last selection criteria that you used, so you don't have to re-enter all of the information each time. So I double-clicked, which filled out the form for me with my item number, and I can run this report. And what we'll see on this report is a very concise listing, what we have on hand, what's committed in existing open orders, therefore what we have available to sell, what we have on order in terms of purchasing, unit cost, and this is in terms of our sale unit or our stocking unit, and therefore the value. This report gives us a separate page for each warehouse, and then within the warehouse it's going to categorize our items within product type. So it's a very good summary of the current status of our items. So that's the stock status report. Let's move now to the inventory activity report. These reports all let you look at the inventory from a slightly different angle. I double-clicked again to bring up my last selection options. This report runs for an entire period, accounting period, and again you can filter it by warehouse product type. We have opted to just run it for our demonstration item. This report gives you a good idea of sort of the flow of this item through your inventory. What we can see here is no beginning balance in our case because this was a new item. We don't have any historical information. But we have received or built, we've received in through purchasing a certain amount of these. If we are working in manufacturing, we may have built some of this item. What have we sold and or issued? So sold by way of ordering and or issued out for other work orders. Have we done adjustments and returns? Have we transferred in or out of the warehouse? And we can then see our ending balance. And if you recall, this ending balance is what our status report showed us was on hand. So this is another quick way to get an overview of how this item looks in our inventory. If we want to focus in directly on what needs attention, then we'd run the reorder and shortage report. Again, we can filter this in any of several ways. I'll focus on our test item. If we run this report asking for reorders, then we're going to find items, and we're only looking at one item in this case. We'll find out items for which the quantity that we have on hand has fallen below our order quantity. If we actually ask for shortages, that's a more extreme case. That will show us if we have actually fallen below what we've designated to be our safety stock amount. So let's take a look at this one. Again, this focuses in then on what might need attention right now. These are specifically the items that you are either short of or need to reorder. And we can see in the case of our demonstration item, we have 54 on hand. We saw that in our other reports. And our order point for this was 55, and that's why it appears on this report. What we have on hand has now fallen below where we have designated our order point should be. So this is another great report that you can run to help you manage what you have in your inventory. All the information that drives these reports that you've seen is stored in the item or combination item warehouse files in the system. Some of the information, of course, is established when the item is created, like perhaps an ordering point. Some of the information is going to be updated as the item moves through the buying and selling process. So let's take a look. We saw that we had an item set up specifically for our demonstration here. Let's call that item up here in the item master and just take a walk through what's here. For every item, we're of course going to provide a description. And there are a few different ways you can categorize items. We have a product type, an item class, an item type. And these are going to be used different places through the system to either categorize things for reporting purposes or perhaps for sales analysis. We've established MSRP that we get from the vendor. We can set up a different unit of measure for purchase and for sale. And then we supply a conversion factor. So we'll see in a little while how the system automatically converts for us between our purchase and our sale units. If we're using lotted or serialized inventory, we can make note of which items are lotted, serialized, and or which items we actually track in inventory. If we have substitute or alternate superseded items, we can list that here. And then dates. We saw several dates on one of the reports. So at the item level itself, we'll have last activity dates, and we'll see those at the individual warehouse level as well. Depending on how we're doing our accounting, we may be establishing some GL accounts at this level. You may be attaching an image to the item, and you can set up the description here on this tab. So a lot of information about the item in general. Let's take a look at the actual warehouse records. We just have two warehouses that we're using for this demo. So for the warehouse, we can track where it's located, aisles, racks, bins, what have you. And we'll specify, again, depending on how our accounting is being done, specify a distribution code. Now this is worth noting because the distribution codes in Addon are set up this way so that we have one distribution code that lists all the various general ledger accounts that are going to be affected as we buy and sell or make these goods. So individual users, operators of the system don't have to remember and be putting in these accounts. You refer to a group of accounts by way of a distribution code, and that keeps the accounting much cleaner. A lot of these are self-explanatory, how you're handling your physical inventory and so on. We've established a price that we're going to charge, and this of course is going to be now per sale unit. If we've done any price changes, you may have a prior price listed here. And then we have several costs here as well. What's important to take away is that you have your choice in the system of whether you're using average or standard or replacement costing. This system right now is set up to be using average costing. Whichever costing you're using, and the three amounts here for our demonstration item were all entered the same. Whichever of these methods you're currently using will be repeated and stored here in the unit cost. So when you see unit cost all throughout various reports and so on, the unit cost is a repeat of whichever of these costing methods you currently have in effect. And we can see some information about our quantities here as well. What do we currently have on hand? And there's a drill down here that will show us transactions behind that amount. So that's very handy to have. And likewise, we can see if we have purchase orders outstanding, work orders in effect that comprise amount that we might have on order, and on the sales side as well. Do we have outstanding sales or work orders that are responsible for commitments against this item? And then the last, transaction dates. We saw transaction dates at the item level. We'll see them at the warehouse level as well for the activity at this particular warehouse. So I can navigate to my other warehouse and see that I have different quantity on hand here. So as I mentioned, some of this information, in particular, our dates and our quantities, and sometimes our costs, depending on your costing method. Some of this information is going to continually be changing as purchasing and selling are happening in the system. Some of the information is going to be a little more static. If, for example, I look at the stocking tab, we have established an order point here, an economic order quantity. We haven't established any safety stock for this one, but these numbers may or may not change. So we have an item in inventory. We have this item stocked at 2 warehouses. This item is purchased by the drum, in this case, sold or stocked by the gallon. So let's go to the purchasing side now, and let's purchase some additional units and watch how everything works, watch how inventory is affected as we set up a purchase order, as we receive that purchase order, and then move on over and sell some of these items. So let's move over to the purchasing side now. We'll select the purchase order module from our top menu panel, and that will then provide the individual purchasing tasks in the lower menu panel. The system accommodates replenishment, where it will automatically create requisitions for us based on certain replenishment formulas. We can enter requisitions manually as well. We're going to jump into the process in the middle here for our demo today and go directly into purchase order entry. We'll ask the system to assign for us the next purchase order. If this purchase order is coming from a requisition, we could enter that requisition here, but that's not required. I'm entering a purchase order straight out here. Provide the vendor. Now, a lot of this information will be filled out for us at that point, and this information is coming from, for the most part, the vendor's information. The order date will default to the system date, and I can also supply other dates here. Date required, promised by, don't deliver before, and all of these dates would then be the defaults, but could be overridden as we enter the individual lines. We'll just leave this as it is for now, and we'll move down into our detail grid where we can purchase our individual line items. So this will just be a standard item. We want this to go to warehouse 1, and we'll put in our test item. We'll see the description displayed, and now here we see our purchase unit of measure is by the drum, and it shows us our conversion factor of 55. So for those purchasing, they only need to think about how many drums I need to purchase. It's possible to have price breaks in effect, of course, so I may get a different price from my vendor if I'm ordering 1 than if I'm ordering 5 or 10. So in this case, if I order 1 item from this vendor, I am at the basic unit cost. If I were to order, for example, 5, well, this vendor has a price break in effect, so the unit cost is less if I'm ordering more. So the system easily accommodates that. And let's just order 3 of them in our case. That takes us back to the full price. Right? And I can go on entering lines in this way. We'll do a save here and just purchase some more of our test item for now. And that's all that we need to do then to get this purchase order set up. Of course, we want to print it and send it off. But what I'd like to do here is return briefly to inventory and take a look at how inventory has been affected by recording that purchase order. So I'm going to go back into my inventory items here and take a look at my test item. It's very quick and easy to take a look at my availability. Of course, here in inventory maintenance, I could go on into the warehouse master, call up an individual warehouse, and see that I now have, look at that, 165 on order. I purchased 3 drums. The system has taken care of converting that now for me into my stocking or my sale units. For the inventory person looking at this, we now see 165 gallons are on order. So I could look at my availability by calling up the individual warehouses, but it's also very easy in the application from any place where I find binoculars or magnifying glass. It's very easy to also jump over to the Espresso search. Let's go there for just a moment. I can do all sorts of different drill downs into the database using Espresso. So here, if I highlight inventory, I can scroll down and select the item of interest. And once I've done that, then I can take a look at all of these other things within inventory for this highlighted item. So here, by simply clicking on price and availability, I can go directly into the table that stores across all of my warehouses my current quantities. So this is a great one-stop place to see what I have on hand, committed, on order across all of my warehouses. So we've seen that just by recording that purchase order, inventory has already been updated with the fact that we have more items on order for Warehouse 1, and we can look at that on order information in several different ways. So it's easy to get to that information. What we'd like to do next is go down the road a step further, and that is let's actually receive that order into inventory, and let's take a look at the effect that that has on our quantities. Let's return to the purchase order processing module, and this time we'll go into purchase order receipt entry. This looks very much like purchase order entry, which is great because you don't have to learn a whole different form. These forms are very similar, very easy, whether you're using requisitions or purchase orders or purchase order receipts, very similar mode of operation. I'll ask the system to assign a new receiver number for me, and then I need to enter the purchase order number. I don't remember what it was, so I can use the magnifying glass or a keyboard shortcut to locate the purchase order that I'm interested in, and it happens to be this first one here. So I'll bring that back to the receipt entry form, and it asks for confirmation. Do you want me to go ahead and create a receipt from this purchase order? Once we say yes, we're presented with another opportunity to provide a couple of defaults. If everything is great with this receipt, we've received everything we plan to receive, all is in order, we can say received complete. If we didn't receive everything, we would leave that blank so that we know that we have some things back ordered. And for ease of operation, we can ask it to default the received quantity to what it was that we ordered. So just a couple of quick defaults there. And really that's it. If I don't have to make any adjustments to this receipt, if all is well and I received the same quantity that I ordered, nothing else has to be added or noted, then my receipt is finished. And we can see down below that it pulled in my detail line. And here again, I'm talking in terms of purchasing units. So 3 drums that were ordered. And that's really all there is to it. You're done. I'm going to close out of the receiving form. Now, unlike purchase orders, where I can record an on-order quantity immediately, receiving won't touch inventory until I do a final confirmation in terms of printing out a receipt register. I don't want those on-order quantities in inventory to flip to on-hand until I'm sure I haven't made any mistakes. So we can run the purchase order receipt register, and that'll show us the various purchase orders since our last run through this process. Here's the one that we just entered. Again, in terms of purchase units, with some costing information, price information, or extension information, I should say. And this says complete. If I had not checked that box, we would know from this register that we didn't get everything, that we had some things back ordered. It would say back ordered here instead of complete. So you run the receipt register, and this will actually present itself in a couple of different formats. it will break out now stock versus non-stock items. So here we can see from the report headings, these are showing me the stock inventory receipts, and both of the things that I received in this case are stock items. So it just breaks down your receipt in a couple of different ways. And the final thing that we see on virtually any register and add-on is a recap of how it's going to affect the general ledger. At no time during that purchase order or receiving process did I have to worry about general ledger accounts. I don't need to know that or even have access to them necessarily. The distribution code takes care of that for me, so that's nice. So we can see how the GL is going to be affected. And if all was well, it didn't detect anything erroneous in the receipt register, then it will give me the option to update the register. In terms of inventory, quantities that showed as on order when I entered the purchase order are going to move over. On order is going to be decreased, and on hand will now be increased by the amount of what I've received. So this update process will go and touch my inventory again. And it's also going to forward to my general ledger daily detail information about the GL postings. Basically what we just saw in that final page. We'll circle back to general ledger a little bit later. So let's tell it to go ahead and run the update. And that's all there is to that process. We've successfully ordered and received some of our demo item into inventory. So let's go sell some. For that, we'll switch up in the top menu panel to our sales order processing module so that we can get to the various sales order processing tasks. Before we jump right into place an order, I want to visit this price quote inquiry form. This is interesting and very helpful to folks who are working with customers and placing orders. It pulls a lot of good information together for you. I'm going to use customer 100 as an example. Supply a warehouse, and we'll supply our demonstration item. What I can see when I call this up is the current pricing and availability information at that warehouse. And I can also see some pricing information here. The pricing table lets us establish break quantities and price discounts for a category of item. So this would apply to anything in this same item class. Contract pricing, on the other hand, is specific to a customer. So for this particular customer, if they actually order 20 or more, they're going to get a deeper discount. And with the contract pricing, you can establish dating so that it's in effect for a certain date range. And the order process is going to just know, the user doesn't have to worry about it, the order process is going to know which price to pull, whether it should use the full $5 price, or whether it should pull from the pricing table or the contract pricing table. Those rules are already in place. The pricing will take care of itself. Also notice that this is another handy place to get to item availability. I could hit the item availability button, and this takes me directly to availability, again, across all warehouses. So I can see what I have on hand, on order, and committed across all of my warehouses. Now this, of course, is modal, meaning when I use this item availability button, I'm just going to see availability for this particular item that's currently up on the form. But we already know that any place I can do an inquiry, I can also access an espresso search. So if I wanted to go searching for availability for a different item, I could do it that way. So I could return to inventory, pick a particular item, and take a look at pricing and availability for a different item without having to clear this form and enter in new information. So good at your fingertip access to the data. So that's the price quote inquiry. So given that information, we've seen that we're charging $5 or a little less or a deeper discount if they order several, and this would be in terms then of sale units. Let's set up an order for this. We'll launch our order entry form. Looks a little bit like purchase order, just in the basic format, the header and detail grid format. We can establish some initial dating up front about how inventory should be committed. So we have control if an order is way out in the future. We don't necessarily have to commit that inventory right now. And we'll use customer 100 here as an example. We'll let the system assign us a new order number. And again, similar to purchasing, we now have several things that will be filled out for us. We have control over the ship to address, whether we're shipping to the same address as we're billing, whether we're shipping to a different address, whether we want to manually fill out the ship to address. We have a lot of information here that comes to us from the customer record. And we're also able at this point to determine whether this is an actual order or sale, or whether this is just a quote. So we can set up a quote. It looks like an order, but it's not going to commit any inventory, and it's not going to come out on a picking list for us. Order dates will default. We can override those. And a lot of this other information comes from our customer defaults. And notice here again, we have access to the distribution code so that the order taker is not going to have to worry about all the various GL numbers that are in play in terms of a sale. So let's move into the detail grid and order some of our item. So we can see here a unit cost of $364. That's cost. When I give it a quantity, and now we're talking in terms of sale or stocking units, not drums, but gallons, then the system will find the right price for us. So when I put in a 1, as expected from looking at our pricing form earlier, our price quote inquiry form, we would expect a $5 price for this. If I put in a higher quantity, it's going to discount that a little bit. So it knows what price to pull based on my quantity and on the rules in effect for the contract pricing or the pricing table. And that's really all that I need to do to get a sales order built. I can go ahead and save that line. And notice that for the given line, whichever item number is on the line you're focused on, we're going to have immediate feedback at the bottom of the form. So as soon as I put in that item number, the system's going to let me know what's on hand, what's available, what's already committed, what might already be on order. So that's all I need to do to get my order set up. Now typically, once you've created an order, you're going to generate a picking list. I could do that interactively as I create the order, or I could do a batch of them for whatever orders are out there. I'm not going to worry about generating a picking list right now. Now on our way to invoicing, let's take a quick detour back to our price quote inquiry, because you'll also be interested to see that as soon as we placed an order via order entry, inventory was touched again. And that is to say that our quantity committed has now been increased. So we have 219 on hand, 20 of those are committed. So anyone else doing order entry knows that they really only have 199 at their disposal to sell. I still have 219 on the shelf, but 20 of those are committed. So that commitment happens the minute I enter that detail line in order entry. So it's a real-time update of my committed quantities. All right, very useful. When I am ready then, the order has been fulfilled, picked, shipped off. Invoicing an order is really just as easy as receiving a PO. I really just need to access the order, and if nothing else needs to be adjusted or changed, then I can very easily just assign an invoice number to it, and I'm good to go. So I'll call up our customer here. Once again, I don't remember the order number, so I can hunt for it. Because I already had the customer number entered, I'm not going to see all of the open orders, only those for this customer. So it filters it for me. I can select the order that I'm interested in. Now, it's just reminding me here that I hadn't printed the pick list before. So I either have the option to continue or not, and I'll tell it to go ahead. Shall I assign the next invoice number? Yes, and at that point, I now have an invoice number assigned to this order. It looks very much like the order entry screen. We have all the same information here. And just as with PO receiving, if I have nothing more to add, then I'm done. That's it. This is ready for an invoice to actually be generated. And as with picking lists, I mentioned that you could create a pick list at the time you have an order up, or you could do them in batch mode, and you have that freedom here as well. We could go out and do invoice printing for all of the invoices, or let's just click the Print Now button. We can ask the system to give us an invoice for just the one that we're looking at the moment, and we have several different ways, whether it's hard copy or email or fax, that we can deliver this invoice to our customer. We generated an interactive invoice there. Probably in most systems, you'll be generating several invoices at once. And you do have the option, before you print the invoices, to make a report version, generate in report format, a detailed listing of those invoices. Now, let me focus in on the one that we just created. It's already been printed, so I'll select the printed option here, just so that you can see how this report looks. This is quite a detailed listing. We saw the customer facing, with the shading and the logos and so on and so forth. We saw the actual customer facing invoice, but this is a report format that lists all of that same invoice detail for us. And this gives us a chance then to see if we have any errors in our invoices prior to generating an entire batch of them. So the invoice edit report gives us all of the detailed information, including all the actual lines that are on our invoices. So once we have finished then this printing process, we can move into our sales register. The sales register is more of a recap. It doesn't give the same level of detail as the invoice edit report, and prints in a few different segments. So first off, we'll see a summary of the orders/invoices that we've printed with just the basic totals. You see, we don't have the line item information here. So this is a summarized format. And then it'll give us a recap by territory, salesperson, tax and freight info. And then last but not least, just as we saw on the purchasing side, it's going to give us a recap of how our sale is going to affect the general ledger. So it automatically goes and gets the appropriate general ledger accounts based on the distribution code that we used for the order, and we can see how it's going to impact the GL. So once I'm satisfied with the information that's here on the register, I can tell it to go ahead and update. And again, the update will do a couple of things. My committed inventory is now going to get relieved, so my on hand is going to be decreased, and it's going to move this information over to the general ledger daily detail. We said we would take a look at how all of this purchasing and selling has affected the general ledger, and we'll go there in just a minute. We'll wrap up with that. Before we do, I want to touch back to inventory because we just went through the selling process, so we should be able to see that our commitment has now changed, and we have actually relieved on-hand quantities. So a couple of ways to see that. We could just return to the stock status report that we started with. Double click once again to bring up the last selection criteria that I used. And sure enough, now that we actually invoiced the order for our 20, we no longer show it as 20 committed, but instead the on-hand has been relieved of those 20 sale units. And here again it reminds us that the unit of measure in this case is gallons. It's also nice, though, to have the inventory transaction history at your disposal. Now, in this case, and again, we're just filtering this for the item that we're interested in, there are all sorts of different transactions that touch inventory. We've really only been dealing with purchasing and sales, but we may have transferred things between warehouses. We may have done a physical inventory. We may be doing manufacturing so that we're working with work orders, bills of materials. All right. So you can look at all transactions, or you can look at the ones of interest to you. We'll go ahead and keep it set to look at all transactions. And this is a nice timeline then, showing you for a given item in a given warehouse what has taken place. So we can see that via purchasing, we brought in 165, sold 150, ordered 165 more, and so on. Some more sales. Here's our final purchase that we did during our demo, and our final sale. And once again, we end up at the balance that we just saw on our stock status report. So this transaction history report is a really nice, informative report to run as well. So we had a new item in our inventory. We've learned how to keep track of that item. We've been through the cycle of purchasing and receiving some of that item, and ordering, which committed the item, and then invoicing it, which actually reduced our on hand. The last thing that we can do then, to wrap it all up, is visit the general ledger, and all of the updates then that we've been doing will have flowed into our general ledger's daily detail. So I won't filter this down. I'll just let it run as is. And we'll be able to see, since the last time we ran this daily detail, all of the various transactions from whatever modules, whether it's been accounts receivable, accounts payable, from whatever subledgers have flowed into the general ledger. So we'll see the affected general ledger account, and this memo reference information will pertain to where the information came from. So it's easy to tie back, for example, that this particular information was for this particular customer, customer 100, and we'll see an order number here or an invoice number here. So the memo / reference information is contextual. It's going to be different for something coming from order processing than it would be for something coming from purchasing. So we have a chance to review this daily detail, and once we've done so, then this is the final update that actually adds that information in to our general ledger. So that brings us full circle. We have our new item, we've purchased some additional units, we've sold some units, and we've tracked that information clear through then to our general ledger.